Story 1. I grew up in New Hampshire, and back when I was in my early 20s, I lived about half an hour outside of Manchester. At the time, I had just ended a 2-year relationship with my girlfriend, and I was in a strange phase of life, kind of aimless, trying to figure things out. It was one of those times when you are looking for meaning without really knowing it. My grandmother was deeply religious, and every Sunday, without fail, she attended church. After my grandfather passed away, I started going with her. At first, I joined her partly to keep her company and partly because I felt like I needed some stability in my own life. My grandfather was a well-known and respected man in our community, a decorated veteran, and losing him left a huge void in her life. Despite her grief, her faith remained solid. She told me she was certain he had found peace and was finally reunited with God. That belief gave her so much comfort, and I honestly admired it. Faith like that, the kind that brings real peace, is rare. I think a lot of people spend their whole lives searching for it, even if they cannot quite put it into words. One Sunday, after the service, something unexpected happened. I met a girl. The whole thing feels surreal looking back on it. I had never seen her before, which was unusual because our church community was tight-knit, and everyone pretty much knew each other. She stood out, striking, with her dark, curly hair and hazel eyes that seemed to hold a secret. I waited for the service to end and decided to approach her. Sure, I was drawn to her looks, but I was also curious. It was not every day that someone new showed up, especially someone who looked around my age. We started chatting, and right away, I felt this undeniable connection. You know, that spark you hear people talk about? Her name was Emily, and she had this quiet, mysterious charm that drew me in. I tried asking her about her life, where she was from, her family, all that, but she kept it light and playful, dodging my questions with jokes. She said I would have to take her out if I wanted to know more. I liked her sense of humor and decided to play along. After a bit more teasing, she told me her family had recently moved to the area, and she was attending college nearby, which explained why I had never seen her before. By the time we wrapped up our conversation, I had her number, and I could not help but feel excited about meeting someone new. Over the next week, we texted a lot and even connected on social media. I remember scrolling through her Instagram and noticing she did not have many followers. I found that refreshing, honestly. It is nice when someone is not constantly in the spotlight. As we got to know each other better, Emily started opening up about her life. Her family situation was tough. Her stepfather was an abusive alcoholic who treated both her and her mother poorly. And as bad as that was, her biological father sounded even worse. She did not go into much detail, but it was clear they had to leave everything behind and move to escape him. She even transferred schools because of it. I never pushed her to share more than she wanted to, but I appreciated that she trusted me enough to tell me as much as she did. Beneath her mysterious exterior, she was someone who had been through a lot, and I admired her resilience. Although we had not officially planned a date yet, I figured I would see her at church again the following Sunday. Sure enough, she was there, and I took the opportunity to ask her out after the service. She said yes without hesitation, smiling in that way that made my nerves settle a little. We made plans to meet up later that week. As the day of our date approached, I could not stop thinking about her. When the night finally arrived, we kept it simple. We went to see a movie and grabbed dinner afterward, nothing fancy, just an easygoing evening where we could talk and spend time together. It went better than I had hoped. Emily was a great listener, and she seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, which was a rare and refreshing experience. After dinner, I suggested going for a drive, thinking it would give us more time to talk without the distraction of a noisy restaurant. We hit the highway, driving out of town on one of those stretches of road that technically qualified as a highway but felt more like a quiet, two-lane back road. It was the kind of place where the trees lined both sides, their branches arching overhead like a canopy. The air felt crisp, the night calm, and everything seemed to be falling into place. It is crazy how life can change in the blink of an eye. What happened next is something I will carry with me for the rest of my life, no matter how much I try to push it aside. Out of nowhere, Emily started talking, but it was not in English. Her words came out fast, mumbled, and sounded like they might be French or something close to it. At first, I thought she was joking, maybe testing me, but then I noticed her eyes. They rolled back, leaving only the whites visible. My stomach dropped. I swerved the car so hard I almost hit the barrier on the side of the road. My heart was racing as I tried to figure out what was happening. She looked like she was in some sort of trance, or worse, having a seizure. I forced myself to stay calm, even though I was panicking inside. I pulled the car over to the shoulder, my hands shaking on the wheel. Grabbing my phone, I called for an ambulance, barely able to explain what was happening. All I could say was that I thought she was having a seizure and we needed help. As I waited, I kept glancing at her, unsure of what to do. She was still talking in that strange, hurried way, and her head seemed to vibrate slightly, like she was trembling all over. I was terrified, completely frozen. I did not want to touch her, but I also felt like I needed to do something. I had never been more scared in my entire life. And then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. She snapped her head toward me, her mouth shutting abruptly. Her eyes blinked back to normal, and she stared at me with this wild, wide-eyed expression that chilled me to the core. I will never forget that look, it is burned into my memory. Before I could say a single word, she threw open the car door and bolted. She ran full speed into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I sat there, stunned, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My head was spinning, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. I could not move. Eventually, the cops and paramedics arrived. I told them everything, every bizarre and unsettling detail, the way her eyes looked, the strange language she was speaking, and how she had run off into the woods like that. To my surprise, they took me seriously. They wrote everything down and assured me they would do their best to find her. After that night, she was gone. Just like that. I never saw Emily again. She did not show up at church the following Sunday, or any Sunday after that. Her Instagram account was gone, and she had blocked my number. I even got a friend to try texting her, but her number had apparently been deactivated entirely. No amount of searching turned up anything. I scoured the internet, hoping to find some clue, but there was nothing. I even asked people at church if they knew her, but nobody did. It was as if she had never existed. I do not live in that area anymore, and to this day, the memory of what happened still haunts me. That road, those woods, they are etched into my mind. My family has this old, beat-up 2012 Volvo, and every time I sit behind the wheel, I think of that night and the girl who vanished without a trace. Story 2. Legs. I do not know what it is about this car, but it just refuses to give up. It has had a million problems over the years, yet somehow, it still runs. The thing is a mess, a laundry list of issues, from brakes that feel spongy to an engine that throws a tantrum every other day. Half the electronics do not even work. My parents, bless them, are just waiting for the day it finally gives out completely so they can justify getting a new one. Meanwhile, I am the one stuck driving this rust bucket. On top of everything else, the windshield wipers are completely dead. Driving in the rain? Forget it. Even the lightest drizzle turns into a blindfold over the windshield. Luckily, we live in Nevada, where rain is a rarity. My elementary school teachers used to make a big deal about how dry it is here, though I never understood why that mattered so much. Anyway, this story takes place a couple of summers ago. I had just taken a solo road trip to visit my buddy, Jack, who lives a few states over. Jack and I go way back, but we had not seen each other in years. I love hitting the open road, so I figured I would make a little adventure out of it. The drive out there was perfect, just me, miles of empty desert, and my thoughts. At Jack's place, we spent a few days catching up and maybe doing a little too much drinking. It was worth it, though. I was glad I made the trip. The drive back started off just as smooth, but that changed the moment I crossed into Nevada. That is when the storm hit, not just a sprinkle or a passing shower, but a full-blown thunderstorm with lightning streaking across the sky and sheets of rain slamming down. Later, I would learn that it was one of the heaviest downpours we had seen in years. At the time, all I knew was that my useless wipers meant I had to pull over. So, I pulled off the highway and parked way out in the desert, far enough from the road to avoid getting clipped by some semi-truck that might not see me. I figured my only option was to wait it out. Maybe I could get some sleep while the storm raged on. Calling the cops for help crossed my mind, but I did not want to risk getting a ticket for the wipers or some other random violation. Money was tight, and asking my 65-year-old parents to drive 3.5 hours to bail me out was not happening. Nope, I was on my own. I sat there, alone in the middle of nowhere, with rain pounding on the roof and lightning illuminating the endless expanse of desert. Not a single car passed by for over an hour. The storm was relentless, and my nerves were starting to fray. After a while, a strange feeling crept over me, an unshakable urge to move the car. It made no sense. It was still pouring too hard to drive, but I felt like I had to do something. I found myself glancing out the windows, half expecting to see, what, exactly? There was nothing out there but rocks and emptiness. Still, the setting sun was not helping. The fading light painted the desert in eerie shadows, and the thought of being out there in total darkness sent a chill down my spine. The idea of spending the night in the middle of nowhere was becoming a real possibility, and I did not like it one bit. Almost as if in response to my thoughts, the storm began to ease up just a little. I took it as a sign that I might be able to hit the road soon, which was a relief. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in that muted twilight that can be oddly beautiful, under different circumstances, anyway. But the rain was not stopping completely, and I had to stay put. I tried distracting myself by watching the lightning off in the distance, but my nerves were shot. Eventually, the sun set completely, and I decided it was time to try and get some sleep. Just as I was settling in, I saw something, flashes in the distance. Only this time, it was not lightning. These were bright and deliberate, almost like someone was out there with a flashlight or something. Sharp bursts of white light sliced through the darkness, darting unpredictably like they were coming from multiple sources. The erratic movement of the lights set me on edge. It was unnerving, creepy in a way I had never experienced before. At first, I just sat there, staring at them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But then, something shifted. The lights were getting closer, moving in my direction. My palms started sweating, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the rain. Panic kicked in, and before I could think it through, instinct took over. I grabbed my phone, threw open the car door, and scrambled out into the rain, bolting for the nearest rock formation to hide. The rain soaked me instantly, but I did not care. Adrenaline coursed through me as I crouched low behind the jagged rocks, desperately trying to control my breathing. I hoped the downpour would mask the sound of my shallow, rapid breaths. Peeking around the edge of the rock, I kept my eyes on the car. That was when I saw them, 3 figures moving through the darkness. Each one carried a flashlight, their beams bouncing wildly as if they were drunk, disoriented, or just plain erratic. It was unsettling, to say the least. They were not just walking toward the car, they were circling it, shining their flashlights all over, inspecting it like they were searching for something. But their movements, they were wrong. Unnatural. The way they waved those flashlights around made it look like they were on something, drugs or worse. I squinted, trying to get a better look, but the darkness and rain obscured most of the details. Suddenly, one of them raised a gun and fired a shot into the air. The crack of the gunshot shattered the night, and I flinched so hard I almost yelped. My teeth clamped down on my bottom lip, hard enough to draw blood. I froze, pressing myself as close to the rock as I could, willing myself to be invisible. My mind was racing, my body trembling, but I knew I had to stay absolutely still. For what felt like an eternity, I did not dare move. The rain drummed steadily around me, but it was not enough to drown out my terror. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. Slowly, ever so slowly, I tilted my head to peek around the rock again. My stomach dropped. The lights were gone. The darkness was overwhelming, and I could not see anything near the car. It was as if they had vanished. I stayed frozen, unsure of what to do, until suddenly, the flashlights flickered back to life. They danced around my car again, erratic and taunting, like they knew I was watching. I realized I could not stay there all night. My hands shook as I pulled my phone from my pocket, struggling to unlock it with trembling fingers. I managed to dial 911, whispering into the phone as I tried to explain what was happening. My voice was barely above a murmur, but the operator assured me help was on the way. Relief and fear hit me in equal measure. Minutes felt like hours as I huddled behind the rock, waiting. Finally, the faint red and blue glow of police lights appeared on the horizon. The moment those lights flashed, the three figures bolted, disappearing into the darkness like shadows dissolving in the rain. By the time the police car pulled up next to my vehicle, they were long gone. I ran toward the officer, waving my arms and practically collapsing in relief. I spilled the entire story to him, every unsettling detail. He listened quietly, his expression calm, almost too calm. It was as though this was just another Tuesday night for him, which somehow made the whole thing feel even more disturbing. He stayed with me while the storm passed, which I was grateful for, and thankfully he did not tow my car. I was too shaken to even care about the car's issues at that point. All I knew was that I wanted to get home as fast as possible. That night has stayed with me ever since. I think about it all the time, and honestly, I have not gone on a road trip since. What I am about to tell you next, though, is even more unbelievable. Story 3. The strangest thing I have ever experienced happened a few months back. My name is Lisa, and my friend Amy and I were driving from Florida to New York. We had just spent a few days visiting some old friends who were going to college down south. It was a great trip, full of laughter and memories, but Amy and I needed to get back to our regular lives. We planned the drive as a straight shot, just the two of us, armed with a pile of snacks, a playlist of our favorite songs, and plenty of time to catch up on things we had not talked about in ages. Looking back, maybe we should have stayed one more night at our friend's place, but I was eager to get home. We drove through the night, cruising along empty highways under the stars, and continued as the sun rose. A few hours into the morning, I started feeling uncomfortable. My back ached from being in the same position for so long. I told Amy we should pull over somewhere, stretch our legs, grab some gas, and maybe find a bite to eat before getting back on the road. We passed a few exits before finally taking one that advertised a charming, touristy little town. For the life of me, I cannot remember the name of that place. It had one of those signs boasting attractions, unique shops, and local history. But as we drove in, something about it felt off. The streets were eerily quiet, and the buildings had a tired, run-down look, like they were still standing, but just barely. It was hard to explain the feeling. You know how some places just feel wrong, even if you cannot pinpoint why. This was one of those. It reminded me of a ghost town, where everything looks abandoned but still kind of operational. Our first stop was a convenience store. We had to drive a little ways into the town before we even found it. When we pulled into the parking lot, I stretched my legs while Amy parked the car. The store seemed normal enough from the outside, so we went in to grab some drinks and snacks. Amy was hunting for a specific drink she loves, but she got irritated when she could not find it. She has a flair for the dramatic, so I played along, offering to check another store with her. Before we left, I grabbed a bottle of water and went to the counter to pay. The cashier was a woman in her early 30s, I would guess. She was tall, had dark brown hair, and wore suspenders, a detail that stuck with me because you do not see people wearing those much anymore. I paid for my drink, thanked her, and left. Amy had already spotted another convenience store just across the street. She was determined to find her drink, so we crossed over and went inside. The moment I stepped through the door, my stomach dropped. The cashier behind the counter looked exactly like the woman at the first store. Same face, same hair, same height, even the same suspenders. It was like seeing a clone. I froze. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Eventually, I asked her, "Do you have a twin or a sister who works nearby?" She gave me a puzzled look, then said she was an only child. Her tone had a hint of suspicion, like she thought I was messing with her. I tried to explain what I had seen, but she just shrugged it off, looking at me like I was crazy. Feeling awkward, I backed out of the store and dragged Amy with me. Outside, I explained what had just happened and asked if she had noticed the resemblance. Amy just laughed and said she had not paid attention to the first cashier. She figured I was just overtired from the long drive. But I knew what I saw. Determined to prove I was not imagining things, I insisted we go back to the first store. Amy rolled her eyes but went along with it. When we got there, my heart sank. The cashier inside was completely different. This time, it was an older woman with light-colored hair, shorter and clearly middle-aged. There was absolutely no sign of the woman I had seen before. There was absolutely no way anyone could have mistaken that second cashier for the first. They did not even look remotely alike, not even in the same age range. It was like I had imagined the whole thing. Amy kept telling me to let it go, that I was probably just tired, but I knew I was not imagining things. Still, there was nothing I could do to prove it, so eventually, I dropped it, though I could not shake the feeling that something strange was happening. We needed gas, so we stopped at the first gas station we saw. It was eerily quiet, not a soul in sight. Just our car, the pumps, and a small building where you would go to pay. It was so empty that it felt surreal. Amy and I got out and walked into the little shop. True to form, she spent way too much time looking for her drink, even though I could have bet money it was not there. While she wandered the aisles, I paid for the gas and waited for her by the door. We could not have been inside for more than a couple of minutes. When we finally walked out, I stopped dead in my tracks. What had been a completely empty gas station just seconds ago was now packed. And I mean packed. Cars filled every pump, with some even lined up behind others like it was rush hour at the busiest station in the entire state. The parking lot, which had been deserted when we walked in, was now crammed with vehicles. But the strangest part was the people. It felt like every single one of them was staring at us as we walked back to the car. I do not think I have ever felt more unsettled in my life. This time, Amy could not brush it off. She admitted something weird was definitely going on. We both felt the same eerie tension, like we had stepped out of reality for a moment and come back to something wrong. Neither of us wanted to stick around any longer, so we decided to skip the food and get back on the highway. Honestly, I had lost my appetite by then anyway. The drive out of town was quiet. Amy and I did not say much for a while. I was not exactly scared, but there was this nagging feeling in my gut, like something was still off. Eventually, we started talking about how bizarre the whole situation had been. Just as we were beginning to relax, something else happened that sent our nerves into overdrive. A minivan passed us, a Toyota Sienna with a windshield that was cracked so badly it looked like a spiderweb. I remember it clearly because the crack was huge, and the side of the van was scratched up pretty badly. Amy even made a joke about it, though I cannot remember exactly what she said. Then, about 10 minutes later, the exact same minivan passed us again. I am not exaggerating, it was the same van. The same crack, the same scratches, everything. There was no mistaking it. We had been driving in a straight line, going fast enough that there was no way it could have somehow gotten ahead of us. The odds of seeing two identical vans with the same damage were astronomically low. Amy started freaking out, repeating, "Oh my God," over and over. I could tell she was on the verge of a full-blown panic attack. She begged me to speed up, and I did. Inside, I was just as terrified as she was, but I had to keep it together. I was the driver, and I knew I needed to stay focused for both of our sakes. All I wanted was to get back on the highway and leave that town far behind. When I glanced at the GPS, my stomach dropped again. Somehow, an entire hour had passed since we left the gas station, even though it felt like no more than 15 minutes. I wanted to tell Amy, but I could not bring myself to add more fuel to the fire. My heart was racing, but I just kept my eyes on the road, half expecting the GPS to start leading us in circles. Finally, we made it back to the highway. Just like that, the nightmare was over. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but by the time we got home hours later, it felt like we were waking up from some bizarre, disjointed dream. Even now, thinking back on it, the whole experience feels unreal. I have told a few people about it, but most just give me weird looks, like I am crazy. I have tried looking up stories online about strange occurrences in towns like that, and I have come across a few that are oddly similar. The thing that sticks with me the most, though, is that feeling in my gut. It is hard to describe, but it was like my body knew something was wrong before my brain could process it. Until that trip, I never really understood what people meant when they talked about gut feelings. It was one of those feelings you cannot ignore, a deep, unsettling sense in your gut that something is off. It is hard to put into words, but it is like every instinct you have is screaming at you to pay attention, to recognize that something is not right. Every fiber of my being was practically begging me to notice, to get out of there, to leave it all behind. I never want to feel that way again. It was not fear exactly, but something even deeper, more primal. To this day, I cannot explain what happened or why I felt the way I did. I just know that whatever it was, it left a mark on me, a quiet reminder to trust those gut feelings when they come, because they might just be trying to save you.